Hello everyone, I am Jos. As said, I am in the previous life I was a live sound engineer, and I particularly did a lot of touring in theatre, but then in summer I would work in festival season, do system engineering for festivals where a recurring theme is sound levels, and a lot of arguments about sound levels, and people want things louder, never people wanting levels quieter. And a lot of ambiguity about measuring what's an appropriate measurement. Is your measurement device actually appropriately calibrated and all that? And also the discussion about whose prerogative it is to set a sound level. Is this the musicians, or if this is a loud band so it has to be loud, or if the sound engineer wants it loud and he gets paid by the band so he's right. So there's a whole stream of arguments around that problem that I was always really interested in, and then for reasons not relevant to this presentation, I ended up being an academic, and I did a PhD, which is what I call making things louder. So I'm really interested in making things louder, and ended up working in this area of sound level management in music venues, but from my industry background and bringing my ideas about my experiences. Although I'm in Perth, I've been doing a few things in Melbourne with people in Melbourne, like the hearing CRC, because of with the Agents of Change principle, Melbourne is making really big steps, and it is in the international eyes making progress, or at least doing something in this arena. So that's really interesting. So I started to think about the problem. One end there is the hearing protection or the hearing damage risk, and the other hand is the environment, the regulation, and the neighbours. And they're all about the levels that you set in the venue. So for me, the flip side of the same coin. Because ultimately, the discussion about the control or setting the level takes place in the venue every night again. And whether the problems are with the environment or the regulation or with people's hearing, the solution could be in the same space. So one way of looking at it is identifying all different stakeholders that are invested in that discussion about the sound level. And when you're at home or in your car or on your phone, you are the master of this. You've got one control, one place where you can set the level, and you're the master of the sound level. And in some music venues that's the case as well. If you just play, if you just have a DJ playing, or if you just play music from the radio, you can still control the sound level. But if you're in a venue with a band, there are many influences on the sound level. There's not one spot where you can, the sound engineer never has full control over what people hear and the sound levels that occur. If there is an enthusiastic guitar player who decides to crank up their amplifier mid-concert, the sound level will go up because the vocals will need to be louder, and then the drums will need to be louder, and the keyboard will need to be louder, and the guitar goes louder. I'm sure you're all familiar with the procedure. So in order to set that level, you have to have an understanding of those stakeholders, particularly beginning with sound engineers and the musicians. But the audience are the direct recipients of that. And if you're in a venue regularly, then you will know, if you're in the front of house, every now and then someone will come, can't you turn it up? It's not loud enough, I'm not feeling it. Or mate, it's way too loud, you need to turn it down. So audiences often have an interest in that. Venue staff, they are protected by the regulations of occupational health and safety, so they have to abide by that 85 decibel over 8 hours rule. And venue management has to make sure that happens, and has to have control over that, and has to be able to identify what's going on. In terms of neighbours, property developers who want to try and close your venue down, the EPA, the Environmental Protection Agency, who wants to mitigate in that issue, and in Melbourne now, in Victoria now, reviewing all that legislation. It's really important. City Council, Melbourne is very enthusiastic, a music city, and use that as city marketing, and tries to make it into something very important, which obviously it is. So for me, in that stakeholder approach, you need to build consensus about the levels you can expect, so that you, particularly before a gig start, you can have some understanding of how loud it's going to be in which venue, and how you're going to check that. And it's because of the many stakeholders, I think it's not just up to the operator or the musicians. You can have other levels of control there. For instance, not every live sound engineer has a very good education. People come through the job, maybe started as a muso or started as driving the band for their sister's band, driving the van for their sister's band and started doing the sound. But once you get the responsibility, you are taking responsibility for what the band sounds like in the venue, but also for the hearing of the band and the audience and everyone involved. And you want to avoid excesses if you have an inexperienced operator with an inexperienced band who come in drunk and crank up all their amps to 11 and the drummer gets out as big as sticks and just turns into one of those 109 decibel nights. You want to be able to avoid that. You want to have some say on it. And also, as a venue where you have music every night, you want to have an idea of how loud is appropriate, how loud, what is too loud, when is it too loud. We know that for us every day can be different, so something that works on Wednesday may not work on Thursday, or it needs to be louder on Thursday because you're tired or because your hearing may have a threshold shift, so it may be a little bit less sensitive. So it all comes down to measuring and having some way of knowing what's going on in your venue. And I think we're and I'll show you some European examples in a second. We're moving towards there being a measurement system in every venue, and every venue being able to real time know what's going on, the sound level measurements. So I want to say a few things about that. Sound level measurement it's never about the peaks, so it's never about the loudest sound. And in the past we had little Radio Shack handheld sound meters that usually follow those peaks. And they jump around from 80 to 103, from 80 to 103. So it's almost impossible to understand what level you're working at. And also when you think about loudness, that's not about the peaks of the sound wave, but it's like with the iceberg. Most of it is hidden underwater. It's the entire surface of the sound wave that translates into loudness of how we perceive it. So it's really important to, rather than measuring these peaks, we measure the entire sound wave, and so we need to start averaging that sound wave over time, which is not great, not surprising because sound happens over time and music happens over time. So we need to go on. We need to understand how that loudness progresses over time, and that is something that Liz already referred to. LEQ. It's the equivalent continuous level, and that is a way of averaging those sound levels over time. That gives you a more appropriate understanding of what you're being exposed to or what you're exposing your audience to. And you can average that level over different times. Just a quick technical, this is sort of the academic sound level notation. L is for level, A is for the sort of weighting, which I'll show you in a second. EQ is it's the equivalent sound level, or it's the dosage of sound that you're exposed to. And that goes back to what we talked about in the occupational health and safety, where they also talk about dosages. Then there's a time, the time base that you choose to average your level over, and then the number that goes with it in decibels, which is the sort of the ratio scoring system that we use in sound levels and in some other areas. This is my nice animation. So this is showing you 3 different continuous levels. The colors are a little bit different than I was thinking, but you can see a 1 minute level which just goes up and down all the time because it follows the music quite accurately. But then there's also 15 minutes. That's this white line, which is it white? I don't even know what color it is, but it's a more it's this blue line. This is the 15-minute level. And as you can see, so this is one set of one band, and then when the band's over, you can see that level 15 minutes later that has disappeared with the band no longer played. But there's a longer line here, which is hard to see. It's the 60 minutes line, which developed the 60-minute average. Unless you have 60 minutes of music, it's sort of useless because it's calculating with 60 minutes of silence. So understanding that there are different ways of averaging your sound level over time gives you a different understanding of what loudness goes on. For instance, this is a progression of one night. For instance, this could be the sound check of the main act and the sound check of the support act. This is the support act, and that's the main act. So you can understand, at the end of the night, you can have an overview of what went on that night in terms of sound levels. And whether that's something you expected or whether it's too loud or maybe not loud enough, at least you have some sort of idea. From this understanding of having different time averages, there is someone came up with the idea of decibel banking. And that is every night you start again with a certain level, a certain amount of decibel credit that you start your concert with. And when the band starts playing, you are exchanging that decibel for actual sound. If by the end of the night you run out of credit, you have to turn down your level until it's appropriate again to not start increasing that sound level over time. And that sounds very academic, but the interesting thing is, if you do that well, and if you plan your night well, if you plan your set, for instance, you sit down with the band, with the set list and say, okay band, tonight, which is your biggest song? Which is going to be the loudest song? If you work dynamically, only one song can be the loudest song. So during the night, you, with the tools that I'll show you in a second, you can make sure that you have enough dynamic range left for when that big hit from 1967 comes along and everyone starts screaming and dancing, and that is where you can go use the bulk of your decibel money. So ideally with skilled operators, this is a way that invites more dynamic working, and if your music is more dynamic, the averages go down, so the exposure goes down a little bit as well. In order to achieve that, there are a few sound level management softwares that are on the market that all work with these sort of time averages, where you can set a time average and examples I'll show you in a second. They're usually 15-minute examples. There's one software called Metrao, which is from a Dutch firm. But they only lease their systems. They're quite hard to get here in Australia. On the right, there's a Norwegian firm. They make a product called Wave Capture, and they also have a similar. It's where you set a target, and at the end you can see how much there's left of the decibels you were going to use. And then this in the middle here is the system that we'll demonstrate. It's called 10 Easies from Denmark. And has we've done quite a bit of measurement now using this tool here in Melbourne. It has a really elegant, very simple interface with this line here, where you've got 6 green lights, which means you've got a lot of headroom left, or a lot of decibel money left, and 6 red lights, which means you're going in the red, so you don't have enough decibel money left to make it into your greatest hit song that's going to be the loudest song of the gig. And this kind of software was informed by a new, let's say, a trend in these regulations, where they started saying, oh, the level is no longer expressed in one peak, so you can't be louder than 100 decibels or 105 decibels at an instantaneous moment. We're going to measure it over, and Switzerland started, they're going to say your concert should not be louder than 100 decibels, averaged over 60 minutes. And there's always a few secondary rules, like the max, so the fastest measured time, which is in 125 milliseconds of your sound level meter, can't be louder than 125. So that's the instantaneous peaks can't be louder than that. So you're looking at peaks and averages to establish what you're doing. And then there's different rules for different age groups. Under 16 it has to be significantly louder. And it also means that if you now in Switzerland want to put up a concert with, I don't know, Justin Bieber, with just kids under 16, you have to have someone measuring and documenting these sound levels, and you have to keep track of those levels, also for litigation reasons, that someone can't go and sue you, well, you blew up my little daughter's hearing. Other example from the Netherlands, and the different thing in the Netherlands is that this is not something that was imposed by any governing bodies. This was the music industry, particularly the sound hires and the peak body for music venues, sitting down with the hearing protection advocacy and saying, what can we do to tame these sound levels in music venues? So they agreed on a covenant that was recently extended for another 3 years, now going into its 7th year, where there are live concert can never be louder than 103 decibels measured over 15 minutes. The problem there is 103 over 50 minutes is still very, very loud. Those are very loud concerts, and most concerts never ever make that. So what it did for the Netherlands is that it got rid of the excess concerts where everything falls out of tune, the system is too loud, the guitars are too loud, and it goes up to 107 or 110. But 103 is still, and I hear that from engineers in the Netherlands. They say our festivals are still really, really loud. But the nice thing, I really like how that came from the industry rather than from a government pushing down. This was the industry pushing up. So they also got away with a much more lenient sort of figure than, for instance, in I have the Belgium examples. Germany, where they go for 99 decibel over an hour, and then another secondary value for the LC. And I'd like to show you the difference between. So we can. Sound pressure is just a measurement of the pressure of the sound waves moving in air, but we always weigh them. So we usually use, when it's about hearing, we use the A weighting, because then those values are compensated for our hearing. Our hearing isn't linear. We are much more sensitive to the frequency areas where our speech is, for instance. Or maybe that is why we speak in that area, because our hearing is more sensitive. But we also use the C weighting, which is a little bit more linear, but it has much more sensitivity in the low frequency. So the interesting thing with the C weighting is that it becomes much more important for your neighbors, because they will most likely be hearing your bass and your low frequencies, whereas our hearing is much more at risk in the higher 1 to 3K area where our hearing is most sensitive. So if you want to understand your sound levels as something that has to do with hearing and with your neighbors, you're gonna have to be working with both. So that is why for instance, in the Netherlands, they only measure the peak levels of the C, 140 decibels. Those are very loud peaks. But in the German example, there's also a peak. But there is only recently an example from Brussels. I'm not sure if I have that, but in Brussels, where they've also specified a dBc level, particularly from this perspective of the neighbors. This is the Belgium example of 100 decibels, and then again, this is the interesting thing, that you can average over different time periods, so you can combine a 60-minute and a 15-minute time period, have different headrooms for different situations. For instance, if you're the first band on the night, the first 60 minutes, the 60-minute average is not that valuable, because there's not enough, 60 minutes haven't gone by. So it's good to have then 50 minutes backup value. I've got the Brussels here. So the Brussels one, I don't know the number, but they've also specified a dBc level over 15 minutes to keep track of the low frequency that's going on in your venue. Brussels went a step further. They on top of this Belgian regulation, which is 100 decibels over 15 minutes, they've said there's 3 different categories of sound levels, or 3 different categories of venues. And it's sort of below 85 decibels over 15 minutes, there are no requirements. If it's a little bit higher, you have to display the sound level. And that is a really interesting question, because in the Netherlands they chose specifically not to display the sound level. Because many different examples, if everyone can see, oh, it's only 96 decibel, that doesn't sound very loud. A rock concert has to be 110 dB. So people will go to the operator and say, oh, turn it up. It's a rock concert, it has to be 110 dB. Or you get the second band, oh, the first band was 101 decibels, I want to be 102 decibels. So you can get some sort of competition there. So in the Netherlands they had the discussion not to display the sound levels. Whereas in Belgium they do, and you have to make your audience aware that they are going into a potentially risky situation. You have to display how risky that is. But then you understand your audience is understanding those values, which is I'm not sure how accurate that is. And then in the third level of venues, of sound levels in Brussels, you have to not only display the level, you have to provide earplugs for free or at cost price, and you have to provide a rest area. So 10% of the floor surface of your venue, or not in the venue, but you have to have an alternative room where the sound level is below 85 decibels over 15 minutes, so that you can go in there and give your ears a break to reduce your dosage, or just have a chat to someone. And this is probably where I want to end up. But I work a lot with students, and we do a lot of live sound in our studios. And I got local bands in. Well, I'm in Fremantle, lots of local bands. And then the drummer rocks up and puts in his earplugs and starts drumming. And then wants a monitor wedge and wants to hear everything, everything very, very loud. So it means that the stage level goes up. And then the vocal monitors have to be louder, guitar amp goes up. So everyone then in the audience is so loud that everyone in the audience needs to wear hearing protection. So at one point I'm afraid we're going to end up in a situation where you have a band playing all with hearing protection in, to an audience everyone with hearing protection in. Somewhere we've gone too far away. And that sounds a bit gimmicky, but I'm never always sure if just hearing protection is the answer to what we do here. I think if we are more conscious of what's going on in our venues, have a better understanding of our expectations, we can have a healthier sound level and a healthier practice that is more sustainable if we protect our musicians' hearing and our audience's hearing and our staff's hearing. We can keep on doing this. And then I just wanted to roll into demoing the software that I brought, the Easy software. Just one thing about mobile phones, because many people have a sound level meter on their mobile phone, and there's a few problems with that. If you have a fancy sound level meter, it has to be calibrated so that it's according to international standards. Mobile phones all have, particularly the Androids, all have very different hardware, so that all the microphones give a different electronic signal into the analog to digital converter, so they will give a different reading. They're very hard to calibrate. With Apple's it's a little bit different. All the iPhones, all the iPads have the same audio hardware, so whatever microphone you connect to it, it will be the same level across the different iPhones. So for the iPhones you can get some external microphones that are then automatically calibrated for your iPad, so you can have a reasonably accurate, within 1 or 2 decibels sound level measurement system on your smartphone. With the Android that's much harder, you have to calibrate them. The internal mic is generally not good enough to use for sound level measurement. You lose too much of the frequency area. They're quite directional. They often use fancy noise cancelling system with 2 microphones that really don't help your sound level measurement. So this is good to point out if you have people in your audience coming to you, like, oh, your gig is way too loud, or your gig is not loud enough. Smartphones are not necessarily the best way.